This is the only ride of its kind operating in the entire world, and it took a full 8 years to complete. Mission Ferrari is the first ever SFX coaster from Canadian manufacturer Dynamic Attractions. The company was created in 2011 for the purpose of developing theme park ride systems for their sister company, Dynamic Structures, who would manufacture them. Dynamic Structures was founded a full 85 years prior, back in 1926, originally as Vancouver Art Metal. Over time, they would gain theme park experience from manufacturing systems for Disney, such as Soarin', Test Track, Radiator Springs Racers. They also did the retracks for Big Thunder Mountain Railroad and Space Mountain, and they would later go on to do Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey for Universal. The origin of the SFX coaster, however, goes back to Revenge of the Mummy. Though it was manufactured by Premier Rides, Dynamic helped play a part in it, and once that ride was a huge success, they wanted to kick it up a notch and really reimagine what an indoor coaster could do. Little did they know that this idea of theirs would eventually lead to the collapse of the company.
Agents, are you ready? One epic mission awaits. Buckle up for a blockbuster of a ride with high-speed launches, backwards inverted loops, and the first ever sideways coaster drop. The world's most immersive mega coaster.
Get ready for Mission Ferrari.
Tested and approved by F1 Scuderia Ferrari driver Carlos Sainz. Join the mission.
Mission Ferrari would go immensely over budget, create a seemingly never-ending string of issues, and impact the industry in ways that we didn't originally expect. There is, however, a silver lining in all this, and that is that the ride is actually pretty awesome. I had the fortunate opportunity of experiencing Mission Ferrari multiple times in February 2024, which was just about a year after it opened. In this video, we'll dive into the ride's history, the layout, the complexity, rider experience, some of the issues it has, and more. So first, let's talk about Ferrari World. The park opened on Yas Island in Abu Dhabi in 2010, and it was well received, but the biggest complaint was that it needed more rides. With the upcoming Dubai Parks and Resorts set to open in 2016, the Morale Group, who manages Ferrari World, pushed to open 3 new coasters back-to-back as an attempt to keep people on Yas Island. The 3 rides were Flying Aces, Mission Ferrari, and Turbo Track. Only Flying Aces would open on time. Ferrari World had a log flume that was located right in the center of the park. They said, we can nix this to put in a new roller coaster. They decided on an SFX coaster, which was a ride that Dynamic began developing back in 2012. The idea was to have a story-driven coaster with lots of neat tricks, things that you wouldn't expect. These included a gyro table, a sideways slide track, a drop track, various tilt sections, screens, etc., etc. There was 2 years of development. It was unveiled in 2014, and Ferrari World bit with the intended opening of 2015. It would not, however, open until 2023. A full 8 years of construction. The COVID-19 pandemic absolutely was a contributing factor, as well as issues with Dynamic internally. So much so that just 2 months after Mission Ferrari opened, Dynamic would enter bankruptcy protection.
You know, what we did with this SFX coaster, which we unveiled 3 years ago, was we came up with a way that the track could move too, not just the train. So here we've got a track that can tip up suddenly and drop down. What if you're going along on a track and suddenly the entire track splits sideways? So that's the SFX coaster. The world's first SFX coaster opens also in spring 2019. So it's right around the corner. It's going to be in the Middle East. And that's just one of 5 we've got on the drawing board. So there's another one to be following up immediately. They're popular.
Mission Ferrari ended up having so many issues that Dynamic Attractions would have to pay over $10 million out of pocket just to get it up and running. The price originally agreed on for the attraction was $18.2 million. The final cost was $28.3 million. I'll go into a bit more detail about the outcome of Dynamic Attractions towards the end of the video, but let's dive into the actual ride experience so we can better understand why this happened in the first place. So we'll start with the premise of the attraction. The core story of Mission Ferrari is that you're there to deliver a special spy car to Ferrari's factory in Italy, but a rival organization called the Vipers is there to steal it from you. As you're approaching Mission Ferrari, all you can see is this big hill and a corkscrew. Everything else is completely enclosed. You have no idea what this ride does upon entry. When you enter the queue, you'll pass through a laser corridor. There's some screens up on the wall of some agents talking you through what's going on. There's a very simple animatronic up top of someone who's like in the control booth. All they do is slide back and forth, but it still gets the job done. When you enter the station, there are some small double-sided lockers to your left-hand side that you can put some personal items in. You're encouraged not to have anything in your pockets. Any larger items like backpacks can actually go in free lockers outside the ride, which is a nice perk. The actual ride vehicles for Mission Ferrari are huge, but they only seat 9 passengers. That's 4 riders in the front and 5 in the back. It's like a stadium seating. They're staggered so that each passenger gets a clean view, but also explains why the actual track for this ride is humongous. It has this really wide gauge and this massive backbone to accommodate for this clunky looking vehicle. That's why I'll add, when you see it going around the track, it just looks a little odd. It's not your traditional roller coaster car at all. And the first thing you'll notice before you even climb on board to the coaster is that operations here are not going to be the best. Mission Ferrari is a low capacity ride. We timed their operations and got an average of 2 minutes and 40 seconds between dispatches. That's an estimated hourly capacity of around 200 people per hour. And that's assuming that they fill every single seat, which given the unusual number of 9 per car, obviously that's not always going to happen, especially since they do not have a single rider line. Regardless, that is a horrible number for a major ride at a major park that can do big attendance numbers. I know the original intention was to dispatch every 40 seconds, which would lead to an hourly capacity of 810 people per hour. So the actual capacity is significantly less than the theoretical. I believe that's because of the procedures that are in place, not because of the operators themselves. Yes, sometimes you might have a guest that requires a little extra time, but because of the ride system, they can't send out those vehicles quickly. With 5 vehicles on the track, in theory, you could dispatch every 90 seconds, but it seemed like the more you space out the vehicles, the lower the chances are of this ride breaking down. It's like the ride can't handle so many vehicles being on the track at once. And that became obvious when the vehicle was ready to go, but the ride ops would stand around clearly waiting on something to happen before hitting go. Because even though we encountered some rough operations at Ferrari World, this seemed to be the one team that was consistent about trying to load trains quickly. And let me just say, there are a lot of ride ops that would work this ride. It was a huge team, and I'll talk about why that might be a problem a little bit later on. But let's get into this layout. When you roll out of the station, you enter this dark corridor turning to the left. You'll come to a stop next to a screen on your right-hand side. There's a technician working on the tricked out car, and he shows you some of its features. Actually, depending on when you ride this, you might get a different scene. They'll blast it with fire so you can see how it withstands heat. They'll cover it in ice so you can see it can withstand the cold. It's really cool, and they also have a moment where the car backs up so you can better see what's going on. It gives the vehicle some personality, almost more of a dark ride kind of effect, which this ride is a true hybrid between roller coaster and dark ride. From there, you move on into this quiet outdoor street. There's a screen to your right and then a facade directly ahead where you can see it looks like a house. And then some searchlights comes on. The Vipers have found you. There's an awesome effect where a motorcyclist comes out. On the screen, they'll start shooting at you. To your right, an actual vehicle appears with an animatronic of a guy shining a laser on you. And then that's when you hit your launch. You accelerate up to a maximum speed of 44 miles per hour. And this actually came as a surprise to us because they have a door that blocks off the launch section so you can't see what's ahead. But once the door opens, you take off and shoot into the outside. You have the big airtime pop and the corkscrew. Overall, the front of the train is the smoothest. If you ride in the back though, you might get a little bit more whip on the corkscrew. And then you plunge back inside and you hit a mid-course brake run. During the scene, you are surrounded by screens on all sides. It's set up to look like a bridge. You have a Viper vehicle speeding towards you. Helicopters appear from all sides and they start shooting at you. You'll once again back up a little. I like how it tries to sync up the media with your vehicle. It doesn't entirely work, but it was a good attempt. I also dig this blaster fire that goes over your head. That's a nice effect. And then suddenly the helicopter crashes into the vehicle, there's a big explosion, and then you hit launch number 2. It's not very powerful, and it honestly might feel like the vehicle is just rolling forward, but the thing is that this is not actually a flat section of track like a traditional mid-course. There's a very so slight incline, so the vehicle has to launch to travel uphill and then drop down below the screens. So you dip down and enter a mostly in the dark section, mimicking the feeling of you speeding along these windy roads at night. It's a left-hand bank and then you switch to the right. It's brief, but you can see there's a screen there of another car that's trying to get you. So you'll once again come to a stop at another brake section. This one is set up to look like a sewer tunnel. There's onboard audio in the vehicle, so you'll hear an agent saying, "Well done, now get to the Ferrari factory." You'll slowly turn to the right and eventually park at the edge of an IMAX projection dome. Then there's a long pause. You're waiting for something to happen. You can see the city skyline out in front of you, some mountains, and then the Viper helicopters appear. They've got you. And this is where we have one of Mission Ferrari's coolest tricks. The lead helicopter latches onto your vehicle with this tracking beam, and the whole track tilts downward. You're now in the seesaw section. And what's amazing about this is that through the projections, they make it appear like you're rotating all around, when in actuality, this seesaw only has 1 degree of motion. You can tilt up and you can tilt down. But if you didn't know that, you'd think that you're on this gyro table rotating in any direction. It is a very, very cool optical illusion. During one of our rides, this screen was not working, and so we are still doing the tilt section, but without the visuals, and then that's where we could really realize, okay, we're actually just tilting up and down. But right as you're tilted in this upward angle, the helicopters explode, they let go of you, and you drop backwards. That is launch number 3, which you might not expect because at first, it just feels like you're being released backwards, similar to like any Vekoma boomerang. But then about half a second in, you accelerate so you have even more momentum to make it through the next element. And this whole section right here came as a total surprise to us. We completely avoided spoilers. We didn't even know the ride went backwards at all. However, upon entering that dome where you're literally at the edge of the track, the next logical step was to send us backwards in some way. But we didn't know it was going to release us at an angle, and we definitely didn't know that a backwards vertical loop would follow. So this sequence of events of the dome with the backwards launch and the vertical loop was probably the biggest highlight of Mission Ferrari for me. The backwards launch was surprisingly punchy, the vertical loop was awesome, and it's completely in the dark. You can see in this promo footage that they're using some flashing strobe lights. That was just for the commercial. In reality, it is pitch black in there. You're banking to the right through the darkness. There's a practical helicopter that goes right over your head. You drop down again, turning to the side, and then you come to a stop. You are now on the streets of Italy where the Ferrari factory is, and you think that you finally lost the Vipers. There was a moment where we were like, is this the end of the ride? Like, is that it? But you're not done. Suddenly, on the screen to your right, a missile shoots out, exploding at the ground, and lifts the cars off the ground in slow motion. It's an awesome effect that distracts you from the fact that you're now on a sideways slide track. You'll move slowly to the left, drop down suddenly, and come to a stop. And that is the big finale for Mission Ferrari. It was a really cool effect that we've never experienced before. I will add, it is very, very trimmed, so it definitely felt kind of janky, but I imagine if those trims weren't there, those brakes would be a little too harsh. Probably the point where it'd be uncomfortable. The closest thing that I would compare this sequence to is the very end of Primordial at Lagoon in Utah. That ride also has a slide section, but that one was a lot more fluid, which makes sense because even though these rides opened around the same time, Primordial is using newer technology. If Mission Ferrari was set to open in 2015, then in theory, we're using 2013 technology, because it was 2 years of development, for a ride that would open 10 years later. And I think that's one of the big reasons why this ride is kind of a mess. There is a lot going on here. From the onboard audio system provided to us by Holovis, there's a custom score that was done for the ride in New Zealand. You have the multiple launches, which are provided by Velocity Magnetics. For those familiar, yes, that is the same company that was responsible for Lightning Rod's launch at Dollywood. We all know how much of a headache that was. Combine that with the fact that there were so many different problems with commissioning, literally one thing after another, that some effects got completely cut from the ride. The most notable one is fire that would take place in that last show scene with the sideways slide track. And then lastly, arguably the biggest issue, because this is the one that will be heavily noticed by the riders themselves, some very odd moments of pacing. The ride at times had multiple moments of awkward silence because you could tell the media that was created for the ride was designed around a certain amount of allotted time that would take the vehicle to move from point A to point B. But clearly, because of one issue or another, it takes significantly longer to move on to the next scene. The biggest culprit is the transition into the tilt section, where it takes the train a full 35 seconds to park. So as cool as the ride is, the entire experience as a whole has multiple moments where it just feels off. Like there should be something happening, either audibly or visually, to help move the scene along, but instead, there's nothing going on. Which brings me back to that I believe that the system for this ride just can't get overloaded or else it is fear of going down. This ride is unreliable to say the least. Even after it opened to the public, it has significant moments of downtime. We just happened to get lucky where it was actually open in the first place. I know so many people that have tried to go to Ferrari World and not been able to ride Mission Ferrari. I think what it comes down to is that this ride is just overly complicated. Like, complicated for the sake of being complicated. Not in the ideas of the ride, but in the engineering. I believe that the same concept could have been done, but simplified. I already cited Primordial Lagoon. That is a perfect example of another SFX style coaster, but done in-house. Or for those of you familiar with Uncharted at Portaventura, that's an Intamin coaster that's kind of their own take on an SFX ride. You even go back to Harry Potter and the Escape from Gringotts at Universal. Same general idea, but by Intamin, and it's got a lot more fluid motions and is absolutely more reliable. And I understand that because this is a prototype, things were bound to happen, but even with other prototypes, they don't have the same issues that Mission Ferrari's had. And I think Dynamic was just overly ambitious. Right after Mission Ferrari opened, they said they would never build another SFX coaster again. They said if any other companies want to build one, they are happy to lend engineering support, but they would not take the risk and construct one again. And it's important to note that this statement was made after they took the risk and constructed one again. Enter Alien vs. Predator at Genting Skyworlds in Malaysia. This is the sequel ride to Mission Ferrari that will likely never open. If we want to get technical here, it's really the two projects here at Genting Skyworlds that were the nail in the coffin for this company. Dynamic spent a total of $26.4 million to get this SFX coaster working, and in order to finish it, it would require an additional $16 million. That's because what you're looking at here on the outside is all that this ride is. That building is mostly empty. This ride is so far from being completed, the much more likely option is that Genting Skyworlds will cancel the contract and just demand that all of the ride components be removed from the property so that they can do something else with the space. Now, luckily, the other ride at Genting Skyworlds, Mad Ramp Peak, is supposedly 95% complete, so that probably will open, but unfortunately they're going to have to spend another $1.5 million to do so, when they've already spent $30.7 million on it, when the original agreed price was $24 million. So again, that's another $6 million that Dynamic is paying out of pocket to get this ride finished. So it's a miracle that Mission Ferrari opened at all, but now that Dynamic is more or less done, I think this ride is much more likely to have a shorter lifespan than intended. Dynamic still has a parts and service team that they can provide support to Ferrari World if they need it, but you're still going to need someone to manufacture those parts, which Dynamic isn't able to do anymore. So if I had to take a guess, I don't think this ride will make it 10 years. It is so problematic, and I think will continue to be problematic, that if I were at Ferrari World, I would take it out to put in something new in its spot. And I would much sooner remove this before a ride like Formula Rossa or Flying Aces, even though those rides are older. And remember how I mentioned that this ride requires a huge team to operate? Let's say that you're short-staffed. This is going to be the first ride to not open for the day. They're going to send those team members elsewhere where they can get multiple attractions up and running with the same amount of people, which is sad to hear because, again, the ride is good. The ride absolutely has its issues, but is still very creative and leads riders guessing what is coming next. So as a rider, I'm giving Mission Ferrari an 8 out of 10. The tricks are awesome and the production value is high, but the pacing can be awkward and it's common that not all the effects will work every time. Plus, it definitely has its janky moments as it rides along the track. But I think the average rider will be able to forgive those things and still have an awesome time on this ride. And really, I just think it's a shame that all this happened surrounding this coaster because the idea behind it is fantastic. I would love to see something like this at Universal. Like Harry Potter and the Escape from Gringotts is awesome with all its tricks and thematics, but it needs more roller coaster sections, which is exactly what this has. Imagine this style, but as Mario Kart or Fast and the Furious. It'd be a heck of a lot better than the supercharged ride we got. Or Sarah's idea was you take this ride system and do a very outlandish, over-the-top version of SpongeBob's boating school in like a Bikini Bottom land. That would be so fun. The possibilities are endless, which is why it is sad that this is the end of the SFX coaster from Dynamic Attractions. But my hope is that we see other manufacturers, in particular Intamin, take on the style and build more story-driven experiences at theme parks around the world. And I hope this ride doesn't deter other parks from trying to do a ride like that from other companies. As for what happened to Dynamic Attractions, the company entered debt protection in 2023 when they filed with the Companies Creditors Arrangement Act of Canada. It was to protect creditors from seizing their assets, but they likely had a bunch of loans and other financial restructures prior to this, because after overspending on the development of the SFX coaster, they had a loss of over $20 million. So the company was sold in May of 2023 to a Hong Kong-based group for a cost of $2 million. And we'll just have to wait and see what ends up happening to it. But that is Mission Ferrari, a ride that is filled with many unexpected twists and turns and has a story behind it that somehow has even more unexpected twists and turns. So let me know down in the comments below if you've had the opportunity to experience Mission Ferrari, if you agree with the points that I brought up, or if you plan to visit the park soon. I hope it is operating for you. And of course, stay tuned for more here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.